The hushed elegance of the first-class lounge was a world away from the bustling terminal, a sanctuary of plush leather, chilled champagne, and unspoken exclusivity. Or so thought Bartholomew "Barty" Johnson, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a steel will forged in the fires of ambition and an unwavering belief in his own worth. He'd earned his place here, a seat on the transcontinental flight to London, a pivotal business trip that could solidify years of relentless effort. But as he approached the entrance, a perfectly coiffed woman with a frosty smile, a woman named Beverly, stepped in his path, her eyes scanning him with an almost imperceptible yet deeply cutting dismissiveness. "I'm sorry, sir," she began, her voice dripping with an condescension that made the hairs on Barty's neck prickle. "But I don't believe you belong here." The words, softly spoken, hit him like a physical blow. He didn't belong? In a moment of searing indignation, a flash of insight, Barty Johnson knew exactly what he had to do. Bartholomew Johnson, a man who had built his logistics empire from the ground up, was accustomed to overcoming obstacles. He'd faced down cutthroat competitors, navigated treacherous market shifts, and endured countless sleepless nights. But nothing had prepared him for the casual, almost reflexive, disdain he encountered at the entrance of the first-class lounge at Heathrow. He was impeccably dressed in a custom-tailored charcoal suit, a subtle but expensive watch glinting at his wrist, and a briefcase that held the fate of a multi-million-dollar deal. He was, to all outward appearances, the embodiment of success. Yet Beverly, the lounge attendant, saw only his dark skin. "Good afternoon," Barty said, offering a polite smile, his boarding pass and lounge invitation held out for her inspection. His flight, BA 286 to Los Angeles, was due to depart in 2 hours, leaving him ample time to review his presentation in the quietude he expected from such an establishment. Beverly, a woman in her late 40s with a severe bob and an expression that seemed permanently etched into a polite sneer, barely glanced at his documents. Her gaze lingered on him for a beat too long, a subtle but unmistakable scrutiny that communicated a preconceived notion. "I'm sorry, sir," she repeated, her tone firm. "But this lounge is for first-class ticket holders only, and invited guests." Barty's smile faltered. "I am a first-class ticket holder," he stated, pushing the boarding pass closer. "And this is my invitation." Beverly finally took the boarding pass, her perfectly manicured fingers holding it with an almost exaggerated delicacy, as if the paper itself might be contaminated. She squinted at it, her brows furrowing in a show of intense concentration that Barty knew was entirely performative. She was looking for an excuse, any excuse. "Ah, yes," she said, her voice laced with a saccharine sweetness that grated on Barty's nerves. "Mr. Johnson, however, it appears your ticket is for an Economy Plus seat with an upgrade. This lounge is strictly for full-fare first-class passengers." Barty felt a slow burn begin in his chest. He knew his ticket was a full-fare first-class ticket. He had personally overseen the booking, ensuring every amenity for this crucial journey. "There must be a mistake," he said, his voice remaining calm, though the effort was considerable. "I paid for a full first-class fare." "Please check again." Beverly pursed her lips, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features. "Sir, I've checked. Perhaps you're mistaken about your booking. Sometimes upgrades can be confusing." She offered a dismissive half-smile, a gesture designed to infantilize him, to subtly imply he was either confused or attempting to scam his way in. At this point, a middle-aged white man in a crisp business suit, his face flushed with what Barty recognized as the self-importance of the perpetually privileged, approached the lounge entrance behind him. The man, whose name tag read Paul, was also a lounge attendant, but seemed to be Beverly's superior, or at least her equal in arrogance. "Is there a problem here, Beverly?" Paul asked, his eyes sweeping over Barty with the same critical appraisal, if not more overt. Beverly straightened, relishing the opportunity to perform for her colleague. "Mr. Johnson here believes he has a first-class ticket, Paul, but it's clearly an Economy Plus upgrade, and as you know, those passengers are not permitted in this lounge." Paul's gaze hardened. "Indeed. We have standards to maintain, Mr. Johnson. I suggest you proceed to your designated lounge or the main terminal." His tone was devoid of any pretense of politeness, a clear directive for Barty to disappear. Barty felt a cold knot of anger tighten in his stomach. He was a man who had navigated boardrooms and international trade deals, yet here he was, being treated like an unwanted intruder. He knew this wasn't about a ticket mix-up. It was about something far more insidious. It was about assumptions, about a subtle but undeniable judgment based on the color of his skin. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain composed. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him lose his temper. "I assure you, gentlemen and madam, there is no mistake on my part," Barty said, his voice low and steady, radiating a quiet authority that momentarily unsettled Beverly and Paul. "I will not be going anywhere until this is resolved." He pulled out his phone, intending to call his assistant to verify the booking directly with the airline. As he did, a well-heeled couple, impeccably dressed and radiating an air of old money, approached the lounge. They were greeted with effusive smiles and immediate entry by another attendant, their boarding passes barely glanced at. The stark contrast was not lost on Barty. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was being singled out. Paul, seeing Barty pulling out his phone, stepped closer, his stance aggressive. "Sir, if you cause a scene, we will be forced to call security." The implicit threat hung heavy in the air. Barty looked from Paul to Beverly, their faces set in expressions of smug self-righteousness. He saw the gleam in their eyes, the satisfaction of their perceived power, and in that moment, a switch flipped inside him. The anger, rather than consuming him, solidified into a cold, calculated resolve. He wasn't just going to resolve this, he was going to redefine it. "Security won't be necessary," Barty said, his voice now devoid of any emotion, a flat, hard sound. He put his phone back in his pocket. "I understand completely." He looked directly at Beverly, then at Paul, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but of a quiet, dawning triumph that they, in their arrogance, completely missed. "In fact," he continued, his gaze sweeping over the opulent lounge, "I've just decided I'd like to purchase every available seat in first class on flight BA NASA ATAs to Los Angeles." A stunned silence fell over the entrance. Beverly's condescending smile froze. Paul's aggressive posture softened into an incredulous frown. They stared at him, bewildered, searching his face for any sign of a joke. But Barty's expression was unwavering, his eyes holding a depth of purpose they couldn't fathom. "Every seat?" Beverly finally stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. "Sir, that's highly unusual." "Unusual, perhaps," Barty conceded, "but not impossible, I assure you. Please make the arrangements. And then I believe there will be no question of whether I belong here." The weight of his words hung in the air, transforming the power dynamic in an instant. The disdain in Beverly's eyes flickered, replaced by confusion, then a dawning comprehension of the sheer financial implication of his statement. Paul's face was a mask of utter shock. Barty had not only called their bluff, he had raised the stakes to an astronomical degree. And he was just getting started. The announcement of Barty's audacious intent sent ripples through the lounge staff, quickly reaching the ears of the airline's duty manager, a harried but sharp woman named Brenda. She arrived at the lounge entrance minutes later, a walkie-talkie clutched in her hand, her expression a mix of skepticism and frantic curiosity. Paul and Beverly, now visibly flustered, stood beside Barty, their previous haughtiness replaced by an almost comical deference. "Mr. Johnson?" Brenda asked, her voice tinged with a professional wariness. "I'm Brenda Holloway, the duty manager. I understand you've made a rather significant request." Barty met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I have, Ms. Holloway. I wish to purchase every remaining first-class seat on flight BA 286 to Los Angeles, and I wish to do it now." Brenda, a veteran of countless travel crises, had never encountered a situation quite like this. "Mr. Johnson, are you aware of the cost involved? First-class fares, particularly on a transatlantic route, are substantial. For every seat, it would be a considerable sum." She was subtly trying to gauge if he was serious, if he truly understood the implications. "I am acutely aware of the cost, Miss Holloway," Barty replied, a hint of steel in his voice, "and I assure you, my financial capability is not in question. I simply require the transaction to be processed immediately." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, black corporate credit card, embossed with the name of his global logistics firm. Brenda's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she recognized the prestigious card, a clear indicator of immense wealth. The card alone would handle the transaction without a hitch. The skepticism in her eyes began to recede, replaced by a dawning realization that this was, indeed, happening. "Very well, Mr. Johnson," she said, her tone shifting to one of efficiency and genuine concern for a high-value customer. "If you'll accompany me to the ticketing desk, we can expedite this for you." She shot a quick, pointed glance at Beverly and Paul, a silent reprimand for their earlier behavior. They visibly winced. As Barty walked past them, following Brenda, he paused briefly. "Beverly, Paul," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I believe I now officially belong here. Wouldn't you agree?" Beverly's face was beet red, her usual composure completely shattered. Paul mumbled an inaudible apology, his eyes fixed on the floor. Barty offered them a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of quiet triumph, and continued on. The process at the ticketing desk was surprisingly swift, thanks to Brenda's direct intervention. A dedicated agent was assigned, and with a few swift keystrokes and confirmations, the remaining first-class seats on BA 286 were transferred to Bartholomew Johnson. The final bill was staggering, a sum that would have made most people gasp. But Barty simply watched, his expression serene as the transaction went through. "All done, Mr. Johnson," the agent announced, a touch of awe in her voice. "All first-class seats are now confirmed under your name. Your original seat remains, of course." She handed him a stack of updated boarding passes, each one a testament to his decisive action. Barty took the boarding passes, a strange mix of satisfaction and melancholy washing over him. He hadn't just bought seats, he had bought control, respect, and a very public rebuke of prejudice. But it shouldn't have been necessary. "Thank you," Barty said to Brenda and the agent. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I have some work to do, and I believe the first-class lounge is now considerably emptier." He allowed himself a small, genuine smile this time. Brenda, ever the professional, saw an opportunity. "Mr. Johnson," she began, "on behalf of British Airways, I want to sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding or inconvenience you experienced earlier. That is certainly not the standard of service we aim to provide our premium passengers. I will be personally investigating this matter. Her gaze again flickered towards Beverly and Paul, who were now watching from a distance, their faces pale. Barty held up a hand. "Miss Holloway, your prompt assistance is appreciated. As for the misunderstanding, I believe it was quite clear. Let's just say, I've ensured it won't be repeated on this flight." He turned and walked back towards the lounge, leaving Brenda to ponder the implications of his words and the significant financial windfall he had just brought to the airline, directly following a moment of profound customer dissatisfaction. As he reapproached the lounge entrance, Beverly and Paul stood aside, their faces now contorted with a mixture of fear and forced cordiality. They practically bowed as he passed, muttering apologies and offering to fetch him anything he desired. Barty simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. He entered the lounge, a vast, opulent space that now felt eerily quiet. The few passengers who had already been inside were mostly business travelers, engrossed in their laptops or quietly sipping drinks. They looked up, momentarily surprised by the sudden influx of staff and the strange atmosphere, then returned to their activities, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. Barty found a secluded armchair by a large window overlooking the tarmac. He settled in, the stack of unused first-class boarding passes still in his hand. The initial adrenaline rush began to subside, replaced by a quiet contemplation. He hadn't just made a statement, he had created a spectacle. The story of what he had done would undoubtedly spread, and he was ready for it. But more importantly, he was ready for his flight, a journey that now felt profoundly different, imbued with a strange, new significance. He had bought more than just seats. He had bought a profound, personal victory, and he intended to savor every single moment of it. The boarding call for BA 286 to Los Angeles was announced, and Barty, after enjoying a quiet, solitary hour in the now truly exclusive lounge, made his way to the gate. Beverly and Paul, along with Brenda, were conspicuously present, their faces a mixture of professional politeness and lingering discomfort. Barty simply offered a curt nod to Brenda, ignoring the others, and proceeded down the jet bridge. As he stepped into the first-class cabin, he found it almost entirely empty. The flight attendants, usually bustling with pre-flight preparations, seemed somewhat bewildered by the lack of passengers. One of them, a kind-faced woman named Mary, greeted him warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Johnson. It's a pleasure to have you. We're ready whenever you are." Barty took his seat, a spacious, luxurious cocoon with ample legroom and controls for every conceivable comfort. He watched as the few other passengers, a couple of seasoned business travelers who had likely boarded early and were already settled, glanced around, a flicker of curiosity in their eyes, at the near-empty cabin. Barty offered them a polite, reserved smile. The cabin door was eventually closed, and the plane began its pushback. The head flight attendant, a meticulous man named David, made his rounds, personally greeting each of the few passengers. When he reached Barty, he offered a slight bow. "Mr. Johnson, it's an honor to have you flying with us. We understand you've made quite the arrangement for this flight. Is there anything at all we can do to make your journey more comfortable?" Barty looked around the vast, empty cabin. "Indeed, David. I think the quiet solitude is already doing wonders. Perhaps just a glass of your finest champagne, if you please." "Immediately, sir," David replied, already signaling to Mary. As the plane ascended, Barty sipped his champagne, gazing out at the diminishing lights of London. The irony of the situation was not lost on him. He had paid a king's ransom for privacy and respect, two things that should have been his by right of his original ticket. The experience was bittersweet. He had asserted his dignity, but at what cost? Meanwhile, back on the ground, the fallout was just beginning. Brenda Holloway, true to her word, launched an immediate and thorough investigation. Beverly and Paul were called into her office, their faces grim. The airline had strict anti-discrimination policies, and while their actions hadn't been overtly racist, their treatment of Barty, particularly given the clear evidence of his first-class ticket, was a blatant breach of customer service protocols and, more importantly, a display of prejudicial assumptions. The internal inquiry quickly revealed that Barty's ticket was, in fact, a full, unrestricted first-class fare. There had been no upgrade, no confusion. Beverly and Paul had either been genuinely mistaken and too arrogant to admit it, or, more likely, in Brenda's estimation, they had profiled Barty and deliberately attempted to deny him access. The fact that he had then proceeded to purchase every single remaining seat in first class only amplified the scale of their blunder and the damage to the airline's reputation. News of the incident, contained within the airline's internal channels for now, began to spread. Not only had a highly valuable customer been insulted, but he had responded with an unprecedented show of financial power, effectively commandeering an entire section of a transatlantic flight. This wasn't just a complaint, it was a PR disaster waiting to happen. Back on the plane, Barty opened his laptop and began to review his presentation. The tranquility of the first-class cabin, now truly his own private space, allowed him to focus with an intensity he rarely achieved amidst the usual hustle and bustle of travel. He was aware of the murmurs among the flight crew, the occasional curious glance from the few other passengers. But he remained unperturbed, immersed in his work, secure in the knowledge that he had asserted his right to be there. He ordered a gourmet meal, enjoyed a selection of fine wines, and even managed to get several hours of uninterrupted sleep in his lie-flat bed. The flight, despite its unconventional beginnings, was perhaps the most productive and relaxing transatlantic journey he had ever experienced. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Barty felt a sense of calm satisfaction. He had faced an ugly prejudice and responded not with anger, but with an intelligent, overwhelming display of self-worth and financial might. It was a strategy born of years of navigating a world that often sought to diminish him. He hadn't just bought seats. He had bought an unforgettable lesson for those who judged by appearance. Upon landing, as he disembarked, he was met by a representative from British Airways. Not Brenda, but a more senior manager from their LA office, a man named Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson was visibly apologetic, offering a sincere and effusive apology for Barty's experience at Heathrow. He assured Barty that a full investigation was underway and that corrective measures would be taken. Barty listened politely, a faint, knowing smile on his face. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "I appreciate your words. Let's just say, I hope this serves as a valuable learning experience for your staff, and for others." He left the airport, knowing that the story wouldn't end there. His actions, while privately satisfying, had set in motion a chain of events that would ripple far beyond the confines of a single airport lounge. The karma, he suspected, was just beginning to brew for Beverly and Paul. The story, as Barty had anticipated, did not remain an internal airline matter for long. Within days of his return to the US, a carefully worded, anonymous leak about the incident found its way to a prominent aviation blog. The headline screamed, "Tycoon buys entire first-class cabin after lounge snub." While names were initially omitted, the details were too specific to be mere rumor. The internet, as it always does, latched onto the sensational narrative with fervent interest. Initially, the story focused on the sheer extravagance of Barty's response. Social media buzzed with debates about wealth, privilege, and the audacity of his move. Some praised him as a hero, a symbol of fighting back against perceived slights. Others criticized it as an unnecessary display of opulence, arguing he could have used the money for charity. Barty, however, remained silent, allowing the narrative to unfold as it might. He knew the true heart of the story, the underlying injustice, would eventually emerge. Meanwhile, at British Airways, the internal investigation escalated. The initial report from Brenda Holloway was damning. Beverly and Paul, facing severe disciplinary action, were first suspended, then eventually terminated. Their attempts to defend their actions, claiming a genuine misunderstanding or a simple error, crumbled under the weight of Barty's perfectly valid first-class ticket and the testimony of other staff members who had witnessed their dismissive attitude. The airline, acutely aware of the potential PR nightmare, acted swiftly to distance itself from their behavior. The blog post gained traction, picked up by larger news outlets. Soon, reporters began digging deeper. It wasn't long before Barty Johnson's name and his company, Johnson Logistics, were publicly identified. And with the identification, the racial undertones of the original incident became the central focus of the narrative. What started as a story about a wealthy passenger transformed into a powerful commentary on systemic prejudice and the quiet indignities faced by black professionals, even those at the pinnacle of success. Barty, a private man by nature, was initially hesitant to engage with the media storm, but his advisors, particularly his shrewd and media-savvy communications director, Olivia Chen, urged him to speak out. "Barty," Olivia pressed, "this isn't just about you anymore. This is about countless others who have faced similar treatment. You have a platform now. Use it." Reluctantly, Barty agreed to a single, exclusive interview with a respected national newspaper, the Globe and Mail. He chose his words carefully, avoiding inflammatory rhetoric, but speaking with quiet conviction. He recounted the incident, not with anger, but with a weary sadness. It wasn't about the money, Barty explained to the reporter, a thoughtful journalist named David Miller. It was about dignity. It was about being told, explicitly and implicitly, that I didn't belong, simply because of how I looked. I had a valid first-class ticket. I had earned my place. But their assumption, their immediate dismissal, was based on something far older and uglier than a booking error. He continued, "I didn't buy those seats to flaunt my wealth. I bought them to ensure that, for at least that flight, I would not be subjected to that kind of prejudice again." It was a moment of profound frustration, yes, but also a moment of clarity. I realized I had the means to make an undeniable statement, not just for myself, but hopefully for anyone who has ever been made to feel unwelcome or unworthy in spaces they have every right to occupy. The interview went viral. Barty's calm, articulate explanation resonated deeply with millions. His story became a rallying cry against subtle discrimination, a testament to the quiet strength required to navigate a world that often judges based on superficial characteristics. Support poured in from all corners, validating his actions and amplifying the demand for greater accountability from corporations regarding discriminatory practices. British Airways, now facing a full-blown PR crisis, issued a public apology to Barty Johnson, reiterating their commitment to diversity and inclusion and announcing new, mandatory anti-bias training programs for all customer-facing staff globally. They even offered Barty a significant travel voucher and a personal invitation from their CEO. Barty politely declined the voucher, stating he simply wanted to see meaningful change. The ripple effect was far-reaching. Other airlines, acutely aware of the negative press British Airways was receiving, quickly reviewed their own training protocols and customer service policies. The incident sparked a broader conversation in the travel industry about unconscious bias and the need for more inclusive practices. For Barty, the sudden public attention was a double-edged sword. He was hailed as a champion, but he also found himself under an unwelcome spotlight. Yet, he understood the importance of the moment. He had turned a personal slight into a powerful catalyst for change, forcing a reckoning with uncomfortable truths about prejudice that still lingered, even in the most seemingly sophisticated environments. He had not just bought an empty first-class cabin, he had bought a platform, and he intended to use it wisely. While Barty Johnson found himself navigating newfound public recognition, the lives of Beverly and Paul took a sharp, downward trajectory. Their termination from British Airways was not just a loss of income, it was a devastating blow to their professional identities, and, as it turned out, their social standing. Beverly, who had always prided herself on her impeccable appearance and her ability to navigate the exclusive world of first-class travel, suddenly found herself ostracized. Her social circle, once filled with airline colleagues and well-connected friends, quickly thinned. The story, now widely known and attributed to her, cast her as the villain, the embodiment of outdated prejudice. Attempts to find new employment in the luxury service industry were met with polite but firm rejections. Her reputation preceded her, a scarlet letter branded onto her resume. She eventually had to take a low-paying, entry-level job at a discount department store, a stark contrast to the gleaming, upscale environments she once commanded. The polished uniforms were replaced by ill-fitting smocks, the chilled champagne by lukewarm coffee. The quiet satisfaction she once derived from her perceived superiority was replaced by a gnawing bitterness and the constant reminder of her fall from grace. Paul fared no better. His aggressive posturing and dismissive attitude towards Barty had been captured on internal CCTV footage, further solidifying his culpability in the airline's internal investigation. Like Beverly, he found himself blacklisted from most customer service roles that required any level of discretion or judgment. His previous claims of being a manager or superior at British Airways now felt like a cruel joke. His ego, once inflated by his perceived authority, was thoroughly deflated. He struggled with mounting debts, having lived a lifestyle beyond his means, supported by the expectation of steady, secure employment at the airline. He eventually had to sell his house and move into a small, rented apartment, his once proud demeanor replaced by a sullen resentment. The most bitter irony for both of them was the public nature of their downfall. The news articles and social media discussions, once focused on Barty, eventually circled back to the consequences faced by the airline staff involved. They became cautionary tales, examples of what happens when prejudice and arrogance override professionalism. Their names, once protected by the anonymity of the airline's internal processes, were eventually leaked, making their public shaming complete. Beverly, once a stickler for rules and decorum, found herself constantly battling feelings of injustice. She believed she had simply been doing her job, upholding the standards of the lounge. She refused to acknowledge the racial component of her actions, instead blaming Barty for overreacting and the airline for caving to political correctness. This denial only festered, preventing her from any genuine introspection or personal growth. Paul, on the other hand, descended into a spiral of anger and self-pity. He blamed Barty, the media, and even Beverly for his predicament. He often frequented online forums, anonymously posting vitriolic comments about woke culture and reverse discrimination, convinced he was the real victim. This toxic mindset further isolated him, pushing away the few remaining friends who had initially offered support. The karma, as Barty had quietly observed, was not a sudden, dramatic lightning strike, but a slow, grinding process of consequence. It was the erosion of their careers, their social standing, and ultimately, their self-respect. They had believed themselves to be the arbiters of who belonged and who didn't, wielding their perceived authority with a casual cruelty. Now, they were on the receiving end of a judgment far more impactful than anything they could have imagined, the judgment of public opinion, the harsh reality of a world that no longer tolerated their brand of prejudice. Their lives, once comfortable and secure, were now irrevocably altered, a direct result of a brief, arrogant interaction at the entrance of a first-class lounge. And for Barty, while he harbored no malice, there was a quiet, undeniable satisfaction in seeing justice, in its own way, served. Months turned into a year. The intensity of the media spotlight on Barty had softened, though he remained a respected figure, often invited to speak at conferences on corporate responsibility and diversity. His business, Johnson Logistics, had also seen an unexpected boost, gaining new clients who admired his integrity and his stance against prejudice. One chilly autumn evening, Barty found himself in a bustling supermarket in the suburbs of London, where he was visiting for a new business acquisition. He was alone, having opted for a quiet evening after a long day of meetings. As he pushed his cart down an aisle, looking for a particular brand of tea, he noticed a woman struggling with a heavy box of cereal on the top shelf. There was something vaguely familiar about her, a stiffness in her posture, a certain way she styled her hair, even though it was now less coiffed, more frayed. He paused, a flicker of recognition passing through him. Could it be? He moved closer, and as the woman turned to finally get the box down, their eyes met. It was Beverly. Her face, once imperious, now held a weary resignation. The crisp uniform had been replaced by a drab, ill-fitting store smock. The air of exclusivity she once radiated was gone, replaced by the mundane reality of fluorescent lighting and linoleum floors. Her eyes, however, still held a hint of that familiar haughtiness, though now mixed with a deep, almost palpable, embarrassment. A moment of awkward silence stretched between them. Barty felt a strange mix of emotions: surprise, a touch of pity, and a ghost of the anger he had felt that day at Heathrow. Beverly, on the other hand, seemed to shrink under his gaze, her cheeks flushing a deep red. "Mr. Johnson," she finally managed to stammer, her voice barely a whisper, devoid of any of its former authority. Barty simply nodded. "Beverly." He didn't offer a platitude or a cutting remark. He simply acknowledged her presence, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. She looked away, her gaze sweeping across the rows of packaged goods, anything to avoid his eyes. I work here now," she mumbled, gesturing vaguely with the box of cereal. "I see," Barty said, his voice neutral. He could have walked away. He could have gloated. But that wasn't his nature. He had made his point. What he saw before him was a woman whose life had been undeniably impacted by her own actions and by his response. "Look," Beverly said, her voice gaining a fragile edge of defensiveness. I made a mistake that day. I shouldn't have. I was having a bad day. My mother was ill and—" Her excuses trailed off, sounding hollow even to her own ears. The truth, however unpalatable, was that she had acted on a deep-seated bias. Barty listened patiently. He didn't interrupt her. He simply let her speak, letting her grapple with the ghosts of her past actions. When she fell silent, he finally spoke. "Beverly," he began, his voice calm. "What happened that day was more than a bad day or a mistake. It was a fundamental disregard for another human being's dignity, and it had consequences for both of us." She flinched, but this time she didn't look away. Her eyes, clouded with something akin to shame, met his. "I know," she whispered, the fight finally draining out of her. I lost everything. My job, my friends, my reputation. It was all because of that day. Barty felt a pang of something akin to empathy. While he had no sympathy for her prejudice, he understood the devastating impact of losing everything. He also knew that genuine reflection often only came after hitting rock bottom. "I didn't wish that upon you," Barty said honestly. "My intention was to make a statement, to ensure that what happened to me wouldn't happen to others. The consequences you've faced are a result of your own choices, Beverly, not my desire for your ruin." She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand that now," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "It took a long time, a very long time. I was so angry, so bitter. But I see it now. I was wrong. I was so wrong." She finally looked genuinely remorseful, the last vestiges of her pride stripped away by the harsh realities of her new life. Barty held her gaze for a moment longer. He saw not just the broken shell of her former self, but a flicker of something new, a glimmer of genuine regret. It wasn't about forgiveness, not yet. Perhaps never. It was about acknowledgement. "It's never too late to learn, Beverly," Barty said, his voice softer now. "It's never too late to change." He paused, then picked up a lighter box of tea from the shelf, deliberately placing it in his cart. "Good luck to you." With that, Barty pushed his cart past her, continuing his shopping. He left Beverly standing in the aisle, clutching the cereal box, her tears now flowing freely. The encounter was brief, unplanned, and profoundly impactful. It wasn't a moment of grand reconciliation, but a stark, personal reminder of the power of actions and the long reach of consequences. Karma, Barty reflected, often delivered its lessons in the most unexpected and humbling of ways. While Beverly's encounter with Barty in the supermarket was a moment of stark personal reckoning, Paul's path was one of increasingly desperate measures. His initial anger and self-pity had curdled into a corrosive resentment. Unable to find stable employment and drowning in debt, he had become increasingly isolated, his online rants against wokeness escalating into vitriolic screeds. He refused to acknowledge any fault, instead painting himself as a victim of a biased system. One day, while Barty was reviewing news alerts about his various philanthropic initiatives, an obscure local news article caught his eye. The headline read, "Former airline employee arrested for embezzlement from charity." The accompanying photo showed a gaunt, unkempt man being led away in handcuffs. It was Paul. The article detailed how Paul, in his desperate financial straits, had managed to secure a low-level, temporary administrative position at a small, local charity. Driven by his crushing debts and a profound sense of injustice, he had systematically siphoned off small amounts of funds, hoping to go unnoticed. His actions were eventually discovered during an internal audit, leading to his arrest. Barty read the article with a heavy heart. He had wished for Paul to face the consequences of his prejudice, but he hadn't wished for his utter ruin, nor for him to descend into criminality. The irony was particularly bitter. Paul, who had once guarded the gates of an exclusive lounge, had now fallen to the lowest possible rung, driven by the very material desires that had fueled his initial arrogance. His desperate attempt to regain some semblance of his former life had only led him to a deeper, more ignominious end. The news reinforced Barty's belief in the long arc of karma. While Beverly had been humbled and, perhaps, begun a painful journey of self-reflection, Paul had hardened, choosing anger and blame over introspection. His inability to acknowledge his own role in his downfall had led him down a path of self-destruction, culminating in public disgrace and legal repercussions. This stark contrast between Beverly and Paul's reactions and their subsequent fates deeply affected Barty. He realized that while his initial act was a powerful statement against prejudice, true change required more than just reactive defiance. It required proactive efforts to address the systemic issues that allowed such prejudices to fester. Inspired by this realization, Barty intensified his philanthropic efforts. He established a foundation dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion in the travel and hospitality industries. The Johnson Foundation for Inclusive Travel provided grants for anti-bias training programs, scholarships for underrepresented individuals pursuing careers in aviation and hospitality, and supported advocacy groups working to dismantle systemic discrimination. He also launched a mentorship program, personally dedicating a significant portion of his time to guiding young Black entrepreneurs and professionals. He shared his story, not as a tale of vengeance, but as a lesson in resilience, dignity, and the importance of using one's platform for good. He emphasized that while individual acts of prejudice could be deeply wounding, the most powerful response was not just to fight back, but to build a better, more equitable world. Barty's actions, initially seen as a personal triumph, evolved into a legacy of positive change. He understood that his purchase of those first-class seats had been a moment of assertion, a necessary act of self-respect. But the true impact, the enduring karma, lay not just in the downfall of his adversaries, but in the constructive, empathetic work he dedicated himself to afterward. He transformed his indignation into inspiration, his personal slight into a powerful force for societal improvement. He hadn't just bought seats on a plane. He had invested in a future where perhaps, just perhaps, no one would ever again be told they didn't belong. Years passed. The first-class incident became a legendary story, a modern parable shared in business schools and diversity workshops. Barty Johnson, a quiet titan of industry, was now also recognized as a prominent philanthropist and a vocal advocate for social justice. One afternoon, Barty received an unexpected email. It was from Brenda Holloway, the former British Airways duty manager who had helped him process his first-class purchase. Brenda, now retired, had followed Barty's journey closely and felt compelled to reach out. Her email detailed the long-term impact of the incident within British Airways. The new anti-bias training programs had been rigorously implemented, leading to a palpable shift in customer service culture. Brenda shared anecdotes of staff members intervening in similar situations, proactively addressing potential prejudice, and creating a more genuinely inclusive environment. She acknowledged the deep embarrassment the incident had caused the airline, but also expressed gratitude for the tough lesson it had provided, ultimately making them a better organization. More surprisingly, Brenda also shared an update on Beverly. After her public humiliation and the supermarket encounter, Beverly had hit rock bottom. But the brief, non-judgmental interaction with Barty, coupled with the profound loss of her former life, had sparked something within her. She had sought therapy, confronting her deeply ingrained biases and the arrogance that had clouded her judgment. It was a long, painful process of self-reflection and humility. Eventually, she started volunteering at a local community center, working with underprivileged youth. She learned empathy, patience, and the value of genuine service, far removed from the superficial glamour of first-class lounges. Brenda explained that Beverly had even written a heartfelt, anonymous letter to British Airways, acknowledging her past wrongs and expressing profound regret. She was, in Brenda's words, a changed woman, living a quiet life of service and genuine contrition. Paul's story, however, remained a tragic counterpoint. After serving his sentence for embezzlement, he emerged from prison a hardened, broken man. He struggled to reintegrate into society, his anger and victimhood complex only deepening with each setback. He refused to accept any responsibility for his actions, ultimately becoming a recluse, lost in a spiral of bitterness and regret. A stark reminder of the destructive power of unaddressed prejudice and pride. Reading Brenda's email, Barty felt a profound sense of closure. The circle was complete. He had stood firm in the face of injustice, and in doing so had inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that reshaped lives and challenged institutions. He hadn't sought revenge, he had sought dignity, and in return he had witnessed the complex, often unpredictable, unfolding of karma. The first-class incident was no longer just a dramatic story of one man's defiant act. It was a testament to the ripple effect of individual actions, both positive and negative. It showed how a moment of prejudice could lead to public humiliation and personal ruin, but also how it could ignite a movement for change and inspire genuine personal transformation. Barty Johnson, now a respected elder statesman of industry and philanthropy, continued his work, always mindful of the quiet power of his story. He understood that true justice wasn't just about punishment, but about the opportunity for growth, for learning, and for building a world where everyone, regardless of their background, truly belonged. His legacy wasn't just in his successful business or his philanthropic endeavors. It was in the enduring message that dignity, respect, and inclusion were not privileges to be bought, but fundamental human rights to be defended and championed. The years that followed cemented the story of Bartholomew Johnson into a quiet legend. His foundation flourished, becoming a significant force for change in the corporate world, and Johnson Logistics continued to thrive under his steady hand. Barty, now in his late 60s, began to contemplate the future, not just of his company, but of the values he had worked so hard to uphold. He knew that a legacy wasn't simply built, it had to be passed on. One Tuesday morning, his longtime executive assistant, a sharp and loyal woman named Maria, informed him of an unusual meeting request. It was from a junior executive at a rival firm, a young woman named Chloe Davis. The request was unorthodox. She didn't want to discuss a merger or a standard business proposal. Her email stated she wanted to present an idea that Johnson Logistics was uniquely positioned to champion. Intrigued by her audacity, Barty agreed. When Chloe Davis walked into his boardroom, Barty was immediately struck by her poise and a quiet, burning intensity in her eyes that reminded him of his younger self. She was impeccably prepared. Her presentation on a new, sustainable logistics model was brilliant, innovative, and meticulously researched. It had the potential to be revolutionary, significantly reducing the industry's carbon footprint while increasing efficiency. "This is impressive, Ms. Davis," Barty said, after she concluded, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "But why bring it to me? Your own company would surely leap at this." Chloe met his gaze directly. "With respect, sir, they wouldn't. I've tried. They see it as too risky, too much of a departure from the established way of doing things. They lack the vision." She paused, taking a breath before continuing. "I came to you, Mr. Johnson, because I know your story. I wrote my business school thesis on it." Barty leaned back, surprised. "On the first-class incident?" "Yes, sir," Chloe affirmed, "but not on the drama or the karma. My thesis was about disruptive assertion, how a single, bold act born from a place of deep personal conviction can not only challenge an existing power structure, but also create unforeseen value. Your purchase of those seats wasn't just a reaction, it was a strategic redefinition of the rules. It told me you weren't afraid to break the mold, that you understood that sometimes, to move forward, you have to be willing to do the unthinkable. I knew you would understand what I'm trying to do." A slow smile spread across Barty's face. He had heard his story analyzed in countless ways, but never with such sharp, strategic insight. This young woman hadn't just seen the emotion of the event. She had understood its core business principle. He looked at her, seeing not just a potential partner, but a kindred spirit. For months, he had been searching for a successor, someone who could steer his company with both a brilliant mind and a strong moral compass. He had interviewed countless seasoned executives, but none had possessed the unique blend of courage, innovation, and integrity he was looking for. Until now. "Ms. Davis," Barty began, his tone shifting, "your idea is revolutionary, and you are right, my company will champion it. But I'm not going to invest in your idea as an outsider. I'm going to offer you something more." He stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the city skyline. "I've spent my life building this company. It's more than just balance sheets and shipping lanes to me. It's a testament to the idea that you can succeed without compromising your soul. The first-class incident taught me that my greatest legacy wouldn't be the money I've made, but the change I could inspire." He turned back to face her, his expression serious. "I'm looking for a successor, Chloe, someone to whom I can entrust my life's work. I believe that person is you." Chloe was speechless, her professional composure momentarily faltering. She had come here hoping for a seed investment, a partnership at best. The idea of being offered the keys to the kingdom was beyond anything she could have imagined. "I am offering you the position of Chief Innovation Officer," Barty continued, "with a direct path to the CEO role within 5 years. I will mentor you myself. We will implement your sustainable model, and together we will redefine the future of this industry." In that moment, the story came full circle. An act of defiance, born from a moment of profound disrespect in an airport lounge, had rippled through time. It had not only delivered justice and inspired change, but had now reached across a generation to find the future. Barty had been told he didn't belong in a single seat, so he bought them all. Now, because of that act and the values it represented, he was offering the head seat at his own table to a brilliant young woman who had been inspired by his story. Chloe Davis, her eyes shining with unshed tears of disbelief and gratitude, found her voice. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I accept." Barty smiled, a deep, genuine smile of satisfaction. His legacy was secure. Bartholomew Johnson's story is a powerful testament to the enduring fight for dignity in the face of prejudice. It's a vivid reminder that discrimination, whether subtle or overt, still lingers in our world, even in the most unexpected places. But Barty's response, not with anger, but with an intelligent, overwhelming assertion of his worth, transformed a personal slight into a global conversation. His actions sparked a domino effect, leading to accountability for those who judged him, profound introspection for some, and a tragic downfall for others. This isn't just a tale of triumph and consequence, it's an urgent call to action. It reminds us that every act of prejudice, no matter how small, has ripples, and every act of courage, every stand for what's right, has the power to inspire monumental change. If Barty's story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the sting of injustice or cheered for someone standing up for themselves, then let this be a spark. Share this video to spread Barty's message of resilience and the undeniable power of fighting for your right to belong, and subscribe for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the incredible human spirit.